All right, guys, welcome to the personal exit plan. Today, we're going to be interviewing a person all the way on the other side of the globe. Uh, I want to introduce Nicole. And Nicole, where are you from exactly?
I'm from the Bronx, New York, and my family's from Jamaica.
Okay, that's dope. That's dope. So, do you speak any patois, anything like that?
Of course. Happy to speak some patois, of course.
No, I have some friends that are second generation Jamaican or like they live in Chicago, New York now, and they said that it's lost them. Like they understand it, but they can't speak it the same way. So that's why I asked.
Oh, definitely. That's how all that my parents speak to me.
This what's up. What's up? So, Nicole, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I know you're from the Bronx. Like, what did you study, and where have you been so far?
So I'm, as you said, from the Bronx. I actually worked for the Board of Education when I was in New York for 10 years. I was an education major and psychology. I have two master's degrees, one in special education, and my last one was administration. I initially wanted to be a principal or to have my own school. I won't say I totally have thrown that idea away, but that was something that I was focused on. And then my 11th year, I moved initially to the UAE,
Okay.
and I was teaching there for 5 years. And now I'm in Shanghai. And this is my second year here in Shanghai, China.
Okay. Can you tell people a little bit more about what the UAE is for the people that are geographically challenged and exactly
Yes,
how it
absolutely.
connects?
I always say that and forget. Yes, the United Arab Emirates is right by the border of Saudi Arabia, right by Syria, right by Qatar, not too far from Jordan, closer to Egypt or Eastern Africa. Yeah. And I would say the United Arab Emirates is pretty much like I call it the Las Vegas of the Middle East, though it is a Muslim country. Pretty, I would say, more liberal, a little bit more laid back in comparison to, let's say, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Kuwait, and Bahrain, for sure.
So, what happens in UAE stays in UAE. So,
Absolutely, exactly.
I know one of my good friends who's right now is in Bangladesh. I believe he met his wife in the UAE. She has a similar background than you in one aspect. Her parents are from Jamaica, but she grew up in the UK. And so he actually met his wife. He was living and working in Kuwait. And, he would go to UAE so he could actually get a drink because in Kuwait, they don't serve alcohol. And he met his wife there. So shout out to Ed. Hopefully he's watching this video.
Oh,
With that said,
absolutely.
how was your experience there? Like being, I know there are people of color, but being an African American slash Caribbean person, like being in UAE, what was that like? Tell me.
Oh my gosh. I would definitely say, I mean, lots of highs, lots of lows. Because first of all, I mean, one of the lows is there's a big market of like prostitutes there or people who have like a side business, if you will. So oftentimes when they see you and they see you with your black skin, they assume that you're probably a prostitute or you're a worker of the night. And I know that's kind of hard to believe that actually happens there, but that's actually a thing.
Okay.
However, when you speak, there is a level of privilege when people associate and know that you're American. People kind of like, their shoulders perk up and people treat you. There's a lot of privilege there with your passport. There's a lot of passport privilege. Of course, on the onset, when someone sees you and you're dark skinned, most people on that side of the world only associate being dark skinned or being black as only coming from Africa. The idea or concept of being from America seems very foreign, surprisingly, to many. Even if you just introduce, when I used to introduce like, oh, have you ever heard of Jamaica? Like for many people, and I guess it's the same for us, like when you're not used to traveling, there's some certain parts of the world that you're just not familiar with, and I would definitely experience a lot of that. But just like as you said, there's a lot of black people in the UAE, so I think for some people you don't, it's not necessarily the novelty of like I've never seen a black person, but it's more so certain stereotypes or expectations, especially as being a woman, over sexualized. They see you, they just seem that you're probably the sexual woman, and that's regardless of whatever you're wearing. So I think sometimes that was a perception in it, just based on conversation that you would have with people, and you'd be surprised by that. I was often surprised by that. Um, and just from like a variety of men, particularly, like I've met men from like Turkey and Jordan. A lot of Arab men just had really did my experience, I could say, this perception of like black women and what that actually was like.
Oh, interesting. I know the concept of passport privilege is something that is new to African Americans, was just not aware of having particular privileges before. And I think I might have mentioned this on a different episode, but the first time I was ever called American is when I was outside of the country. Because my entire life I heard Black African American, which I'm proud to be such. And I was in Honduras and someone like, well, you're American. And I had to think about it. Like, you know what? I am American. You are right. And so it is a tough concept to realize, but it is passport privilege. And when you do speak English and you have that native fluency, they're like, wow, you speak English really well. I'm like, yeah, it's my native language.
Absolutely. I mean, it's crazy. It feels so awkward. It's almost like the tables have been turned, sort of. Because there is such a hierarchy of like certain passports that get treated a certain way, specifically in the UAE. And to not really feel that pressure, it definitely feels really awkward sometimes, because you want ultimately everyone to be treated the same or just be respected. But they're definitely it's this, I don't know, it's this weird thing that sometimes feels uncomfortable. At least for me it did. Just because, like, I work with people who are from Bangladesh, as you mentioned, or people from like the day laborers,
Mhm.
or the Philippines, like different, and I just sometimes I felt awkward. To feel that I was treated more superior based on like what my passport was.
Yeah,
Um,
I've heard horror stories about the Middle East and how they treat, Filipinos that are day workers or day laborers and things of that nature. So you talked about some of the potential lows, especially people think you may be prostituting yourself. What are some of the advantages to living in a place like UAE, cultural experiences? What made you stay there so long?
What I loved is that it was very easy to get acclimated. I mean, they have a lot of our modern day conveniences. Though Arabic is a language, English is a general form of communication. So there wasn't really a big language barrier in terms of like doing things and access. Um, a lot of restaurants and just like regular things that felt like home in terms of like shopping was very regular. So it didn't feel like I had to embrace a new way of, let's say, living per se, in terms of, I mean, some spices you may have to get, but because I'm like Caribbean, like a lot of the spices and things I cook anyway, or I can use. So it wasn't like, oh my God, what am I going to eat for dinner? Definitely tax-free salary. I mean, that's one of the things that like a
Oh,
whole win. Going to talk about money. Tax-free salary, unlimited opportunities to tutor, just making money on the side. The weather, which I miss now being in Shanghai, like the weather was like amazing. Um, just the fact that it was this new and upcoming country, so there was always something to do. Lots of Black people, a lot of Caribbean people. So even though it was a small country, I felt like you had such a great sense of community. So even if it was like, I was so happy that was my first choice for my first expat life experience, because I didn't really, though there were moments of feeling like, oh my gosh, I miss my family, but there were so many opportunities to connect, whether it was with other Jamaican people, other Caribbean people, people from New York, or just Black people as a whole. I had so many subgroups, and that always felt really great. Um, and just as I said, the money, the social aspect was really great. Um, yeah, I think that those were some of the things that made it really easy to like live there or stay there for so long.
so with the subgroups, like how did you connect with people? Did you use Facebook groups, WhatsApp? How did you strike that communication to get in contact with people from various groups?
Definitely joined a lot of Facebook groups prior to moving, and I would definitely suggest that to anyone. And then you know how it is, if you post often, you end up finding like that one person that either responds to all your messages, and next thing you know, you're sending a private message. I luckily had a girl, I always shout her out. Her name is Ashley. I remember she would respond to all my messages, and then it so happened that she also lived in New York. So when she came to New York, we like went and did brunch together. So right away before I left, I felt like I knew someone that I can directly ask questions and not feel so bombarded in a total group. And then from that, then she also shared and suggested groups that she thought that based on the conversations we had that I would be intrigued by or what I'd be interested in. And then from there, like I did subgroups, and then like Caribbean people are just like welcoming. And I'm not saying this because I'm Caribbean, but like I just think it's a fact. It's like people, I don't know, people just create family. And I found like the Jamaican people there were older than me. So they had like this very maternal and like paternal vibes, like, oh, we cooking, come to Dubai, that kind of like, so automatically you just felt like family right away. And then just naturally, once you're in a Facebook group, what's cool is that even if you don't speak to someone, you just know people's face. You see a Facebook group, you see the face, you go out, and it's all love, like people smiling. And I think Black people, we're just generally happy to see each other, especially in these kind of settings where you took a leap, you're doing something that's different. I think, like, generally speaking, there's just this nice, genuine, like, love of like, oh, you too. Like, I don't know, this, it just feels like this nice extended family. You just you connect even without knowing that much about each other. So I always felt that in the UAE for sure.
No,
For parties, all of that, it was just sweet.
no, I think that's definitely true for expats abroad. The friend that we have in common that actually linked up this interview, Jennifer, I was part of her Facebook group that she created, had never met her in person. And one day I'm walking by her and she's like, hey, do I know you from somewhere? And we like started talking and ended up hanging out. And so those connections happen a little bit more fluently when you're abroad, because here in the States, you just can't say hi to every Black person you meet, especially if you're in a place like Atlanta or the Bronx, you'll never make it down the street. But when you're abroad and you see, because even if you see other Black faces, when you see a Black American, there's like a difference in
Right,
swag,
right, right, right.
the way we walk, we got that different bounce to us. And so people kind of know what it is. But no, that's dope that you were able to make those connections. So how long did you stay there exactly? I know you said it earlier. And what made you leave and
Yeah.
try out Shanghai?
Yeah, I was there for 5 years. I signed a 2-year contract. I ended up there for 5 years. And I'm sure, like, I think that initially the first year is just kind of getting acclimated. The second year, you learn all the things you should and shouldn't do. And then you're like, okay, I think I could do this. I feel like after the 2 year, you kind of be like, all right, I could do this. Yeah, and I stayed there for 5 years in UAE.
Oh, that's dope. So you go from the UAE and you decide to take a position in Shanghai. How did that come about? What was the process? What was your decision making at that time?
Okay. So where I should have been. I should have been in Colombia, like where you are right now.
Happy side, happy
um,
side.
you know what it was? I think my soul, honestly, I know people laugh at me, but my soul felt like I did it. I did, like, I fulfilled my time in the UAE, and I didn't want to stay so long in a place where I like totally disliked it. I wanted to still be at peace and know that I'd be okay visiting. But after, I still know that I wasn't ready to go back home. So it was kind of like this conundrum I was in. I was like, okay, I want to leave the UAE, but I'm not necessarily. Wait, I want to leave the UAE, but I don't want to go home. And I was like, we're also Black people where cost of living is pretty low. That I can begin an entrepreneurial journey. So there were just a couple of things, and honestly, China was not on my radar at all. I tell people this all the time. I was really thinking about South America more so because I wanted to be close to home and I wanted to be on the same time zone. Um, for some reason, I met up with some kind of recruiter and she was like, it's like New York. And I'm like, no, it's not. There's no place like New York. I hate when people tell me
Lies, the
anytime
lie.
there's a city, someone's always ready to sell me on it. So my selling point was that I asked her if she knew any Black people. Like, I said, do you know any Black people there that I can actually connect with? And she did put me in contact with someone. I asked them a couple of questions. And based on the questions, she didn't make it. I guess the way that I would probably describe the UAE, it sounded like, okay, this is not that bad. I did some meditating on it. I did tarot cards. I did a whole lot of things, to be honest. And everything said just go.
Okay.
And so said, so done. I'm here in Shanghai.
All
So
right.
that's how I'm here. Yeah.
So let me take it back just one notch because there's some point that I forgot. So one thing that some people don't know, when you work abroad, they have the foreign tax exclusion law, right? So you file
Yeah.
taxes in the States if you would like to, if you want to stay up and up, but you don't have to pay taxes on the first 120, 130,000 roughly.
Correct.
So what was it like? What were you netting more or less? I know you went to education, right? What were you netting more or less in the UAE, if you care to share
Oh,
that.
definitely less than that. I think it was like 60,000 or so. Yeah, it wasn't a lot, but it's a lot when you're not paying. I mean, one of the things that I was able to do while I was in the UAE is pretty much become debt free. I had over like 40,000, if not 50,000 in debt. That was cumulative of just like credit cards and like student loans. But once you have that weight like off and then you have your accommodations being paid for, then it's like essentially you're just kind of like free money. Like, I mean, I'm not saying free money, but it's like you just have all this money coming in. And in the UAE, like certain times, like I was tutoring, so I would kind of like live off my tutoring. So I was able to like send a lot of money back home, which really is like, I think like the best thing, especially for teachers, or if you're in any place where English, where someone wants to learn English, like you could literally like live off tutoring. And that's essentially what I did. And I mean, here, same thing in Shanghai. It's like I only tutor once a week because I'm trying to, build my own business at the moment. But you can do things on the side while you're, making a salary. And most teaching jobs overseas, they pay for your housing, unless you have to like maybe pay like the difference, maybe if you want to upgrade or, or something like that. The UAE, the only reason why I had a little bit more of expense was because I had a car in the UAE and they didn't cover that. So like I paid like roughly $400 US a month, which is a lot for a rental. But here I have a shuttle that picks me up for work in the morning. So I don't have to worry about paying for like a car, But generally speaking, just to answer your question, like initially when I was had all the money coming in, I was paying off debts. And then once that was, like out the way, then it was essentially just like you feel rich if you're making still like $5,000 or $6,000 a month. I mean, you know what I mean? When you're not paying like a major bill. I mean, paying like your utility is nothing, but to pay like credit cards and like all these other things, like it's a whole nother level of freedom that you have. Like you legit think like, oh my gosh, what country? I mean, I say this all the time. Like, what country can I go next? Like, I don't have anything that's weighing me down, and still simultaneously making sure that I keep my credit really good in the States. So if I decide to go back, of course, like having something where I'm accruing points. Like I've also been trying to get really, really smart with just like using credit cards and using them for the points while I'm away, and like all these other tricks that I'm still in the process of like learning and getting better at, But I know it was a long-winded response, but
Oh,
I
no, no
figured they would
problem.
need
No,
to
people
know.
like that information. They need that information. I know, again, I'm interviewing you and we both go on the education route, which is not for everyone, but for those educators out there that think that they can't leave and still take care of debt back home, this is an example that you can actually relieve yourself of some of those payments and be able to take care of debt. Myself personally, when I moved abroad, I had about the same, probably about 25,000 in debt. I was able to pay all of that off and my credit score was like 540, but now it's at 760. And so it's one of those things
Mhm.
where I was able to repair that, save up, and start looking towards the future. And we can talk later about what people are doing for retirement because I know that's always a concern of expats as well. Another thing, so going to Shanghai, are you still having the same financial freedom? I know you said the school picks you up. I'm guessing they're paying for housing and things of that nature.
Yes. So I definitely took a pay cut moving to Shanghai, but so I always say everything is relative though. I didn't come to Shanghai with debt. So because of the fact that I didn't come here with debt, then I can handle the pay cut. And also the cost of living in Shanghai is it's so cheap in comparison to the UAE. UAE is very expensive. So like let's say if I cook every day, and I say if I cook because I'm not cooking every day, right? If I cook every day and just go based on the amenities that I have, I could comfortably only spend like 700 US, 600 to 700
A month.
US at like a month, like just the like I can just shell out,
That is
you know? It's very, very the cost of living here is just it's bananas. Like it's very cheap. So I think it's relative. And even when I even talk to people, not that I have any I never said I really want to coach expats, but I like to give a lot of tips. Like when people say, "Oh, how much you make?" and I'm like, it's very relative. Like I think you have to think about a holistic picture. Like if you are in debt, you have lots of bills, then I highly suggest going to the Middle East because you're going to make more money, it's tax free, and you might speed up the transaction, you speed it up faster, right? However, I will add a caveat to that. There are international schools in China that I only learned about last year or recently that pay relatively the same as in the UAE.
Mm-hmm.
And those schools are really selective. I would suggest getting on like Search Associates, which is a search where you can go for those schools. Because I have a friend that works at a proper international school and makes like 6,000 um a month. And to make 6,000 US in China, you might as well call yourself Jack Ma or call yourself from like, especially if you don't have debt, like you're like winning. So there are schools like that here, but they're not like it's not like they're throwing it out there just like how in the UAE they're just like, come, you're gonna live in a beautiful high rise like I did in the UAE or things like that. So I always tell people to look at their holistic picture. Like I wouldn't come to the China for my first resort if I had like a lot of debt. I wouldn't. Um
I would say the same is probably for Latin America. They even pay less than China would in most cases. But I mean, there's opportunities to make more money. Like you said, tutoring. When I lived in the DR, I tutored for economics. I charged $30 an hour to do that. And sometimes I would
mhm.
tutor two students at the same time. So I was inherently making $60 an hour, right? So there's ways you can get extra money on the side, but definitely Latin America pays even less than China. But again, it's all relative to your situation. What do you really want to do? Do you want to learn Mandarin? Do you want to learn Arabic? Do you want to learn Spanish? So I'm telling you personally, if you want to come to Latin America, just make sure that it's for the experience because it's not going to be the same money making. But that's relative as well. I know we pay our teachers. I don't know if I can even say this on camera, but probably close to like 2,500, 3,000 USD per month. But the cost of living in Medellin is cheap. Like it's so cheap. You can find a really nice two-bedroom apartment. And we pay for housing as well for 350, 400 USD a month. And then transportation, the school picks you up, drops you off. I work in admin. I went to exact same route. I have a master's in education administration, have another master's in teaching and bilingual ed. And so I'm a vice principal right now and actually just took a job as a principal on the coast. So I'll be moving in July.
Oh, nice. That's amazing. Congrats.
Thank you, thank you. And so, once you start getting in that spirit, the pay starts looking a lot UAE in that sense. So I can't complain, but obviously it's a lot more work and a lot more responsibility from that end. And it's not for everybody. A lot of people think they can just get an English teaching certificate and move overseas and make good money. And that's just not the case. Can you supplement your income? Can you make some money on the side just teaching English? Of course. But to get contracted through what you're talking about, Search Associates, I hire people through Search Associates all the time. You have to actually have a teacher's license, licensor, and even to get on the platform. So it's really important to know what you're looking at getting. If you haven't gone the education route yet and you want to, there's a lot of different alternative education sites, programs you can do to get certified, depending on what state that you're in. I know that Jennifer, our friend, did one of those programs as well, and she's finishing up a master's. So there's a lot of ways you can go about it, but it's not an overnight type of thing. It's not as easy. Like you are highly qualified, you had 10 years experience in the States, which people will hire you with their eyes closed if you have 10 years teaching experience in the States. A lot of times they're hiring teachers right out of college with little to no experience. So that's dope that you
Mhm.
making it happen. But we would like to see you over here in Latin America. They would love you here in Colombia, especially you hit the coast. The people look a lot like us. They have those Caribbean vibes, which is I think is pretty dope.
I love it. Listen, I'm open. I always say I'm open because I'm in China and I never thought I'd be here. So at this point, I always just say I'm open. Like
I don't know how long
it's
you're.
never.
I know this is a whole side note. This is going to be on camera, but we may be looking for a curriculum coordinator at the school that I'm going to. So if so, I definitely will hit you up because I know you have the experience.
Oh, let me know.
So, what? How does it
It's
feel?
funny because we have teachers that just came from Colombia, which is
Uh,
hilarious. And I told her when I see her, I'm like, I'm trying to go to your country. Like, why are you here?
it's always that opposite because people want to go make money because you don't make a lot of it here. And so, but then they get there, they're like,
Yeah.
oh, I miss it. I miss the vibes. I miss the nightlife. And so it really depends on what you're looking for at the time. So I guess because I've never been to Asia before. How does it feel being a Black woman in China? How is that like?
You know, it's also highs and lows. Like, I think the blessing I have is that I live in Shanghai, so it is a big city. I would imagine, like, I have moments where people have asked to take a picture, or they're sneaking to take a picture, or yeah, here it's like it's definitely a thing, where people would just like bust out a phone, or they just do peculiar stuff with their phone on the subway, try to act, they be like, they try to act like you don't see them and try to like take a photo. I mean, just the other night I was at a Christmas market and the guy was like all in my picture. It is a thing. Sometimes I feel that I can tell that it's coming from a genuine, like, not like a malicious place, but just like anything, when you experience something too often, sometimes it's just plain annoying. And like, if depending on the day you're catching me at, what what's on my mind will depend on the way I'm going to respond to you. You will have people that are polite enough to ask you, and then, as I said, there are people that are rude. So when people tell me that they live in smaller provinces, and then I could only imagine what that experience is, because this is a very international city. So I'm sure that it's worse, let's say, in a smaller town. But yeah, you still get that, like, where they look at you. I mean, you can tell when kids, I mean, you work with children, when children is their first encounter. Um, but in my school, personally, my students will respond to me like that, so I can tell that they're accustomed to being around like people that look like me. But like, when you're out and about, sometimes you'll notice that, especially if you're in a place where you're the only Black person. I mean, the difference with being here in the UAE, at any time in the UAE, whether it's going to the mall, what have you, just because there's a huge Sudanese population or just huge African population, you're just accustomed to seeing brown people regardless in the UAE. Whereas here, because it's so big, like Shanghai is massive, I could literally go a whole day, let's say if I don't go to work, and not see anyone that's Black. You know what I mean? Like, I can take the metro and literally like a whole heap of Chinese people. Like, you're not seeing, so you realize how much you stand out. And then, especially with there being so many people, you just feel like this Oreo, like in this whole speck of like yellow, if you will, or white. Yeah. But yeah, but so far I haven't really I only had this weird situation two weeks ago, where my Chinese coworker, this would be interesting because I didn't even share this on my Instagram, but my Chinese coworker, and I know she didn't mean it in a malicious way, but she still said it. She was like, "You can't be Black. You're so pretty." And like, yeah,
Oh,
I
oh,
know exactly.
oh,
And my white coworker, she's from the UK. She just stopped her. She was like, "Stop!" Like, I think she thought she was trying to give me a compliment. Like,
yeah.
but at the weird time, I'm like, "So are you trying to say that like Black people are like not pretty?" And she's like, "You're not Black. You're yellow." Or like, I guess she was basing it on like my skin complexion.
Oh
And
man.
I'm like, "Yo, we come in all different shades." But even sometimes there's like no filter sometimes when they say things. Like, they didn't think about like what they're saying. Like, sometimes, someone trying to give you a compliment, but they think it's a compliment, and like they don't realize how they're saying or what they're saying. And
Comes
she's from
secondhand.
like Shanghai, um, or at least lived in Shanghai for a while. Usually Shanghainese people are often perceived as like, they're international and they're smart. So, sometimes they carry this kind of way about them. But when she asked me, like, I didn't even have words because I just couldn't believe that she fixed him out to like say this.
Oh man.
Um,
It brings up a
so
memory
like those are like moments
that happened to me
that you
before.
might just have where you
Yeah.
just literally speechless, because I'm like, what am I going to say? Like, I'm not going to give you a whole like history on like Black people or just like anything. Like, what am I going to do? Show you my pictures of my family to prove that like I'm Black? Like, so yeah, sometimes you get ignorant. Yeah. So I said to my white friend, I said, "Yeah, this is the life. This is how it feels to be Black sometimes, girl." And like, she
No,
felt so awkward. Like,
of course, because she knew exactly. So the same thing happened to
yeah.
me in Honduras. I was in my complex where I lived in Honduras. We were out like kind of drinking, and this one girl was just like, "But we're talking about African Americans and the crime rate and how we get incarcerated at a higher rate." But she's like, "But you're not like a black person." Wait, what? I start feeling myself like, all right, hold on. Like, what do you mean? She's like, no, I mean, you're like educated and articulate. And I was just like, So this other girl from Canada came and like put her hand over her mouth, was like, stop it. Just
Yeah.
and I had to walk away same way. It's like, what did you say in that situation? I knew she was drunk, but I also knew like, okay, what is she trying to get at? Because I'm articulate and I'm educated. I can't be black. Yeah. Anyhow, so I know how you feel exactly when you was telling me that, but um, yeah, I guess people say ignorant stuff, and we got those same colorisms in the states with the oh you're pretty to be dark skinned, or that whole concept of good hair, bad hair, those things that were
Yeah.
downloaded on us by colonialism and by slavery and white supremacy. So, and those are things that we have to personally unpack. And so it's not surprising that internationally that those sentiments are out there, but it's still kind of like weird to hear it when you hear it out
It
loud.
is. And it's funny because I thought about it a couple of days after, and sometimes I feel guilty, because I worked at a really amazing school when I was in New York, and sometimes I feel guilty because I'm like, I'd rather be with like my people, right, in terms of like being in the school, and just like I always work with brown and like always with Latinos and black people, like that's always been just kind of like the schools that I work with in the Bronx, and sometimes I feel guilty. And in that moment, like a couple of days after, I was like, this is probably why I need to be over here, or why they need to have like, you know, more interactions with us, because they're just going to continue and then share with their kids, and like this continued like skewed view, especially about like black people. Like I feel like they need us like in these international schools and need us overseas, because not saying that I have to be the representative, but I just feel like they need more experiences. Like the world needs to experience in all different capacity, not just like say in the US, because it just shows you how limited certain people's views are, or the way they see us. And sometimes they just need to interact with us like regular human beings, as crazy as that may sound, but just like be in the office with us and know that we eat, breathe, and do regular things like you do, or we have ideas and thoughts, and we're not a monolith, and like all these type of ideas. Like it's so important, because otherwise they will continue to have these thoughts, and just like I don't know.
No, it
It's
happens in the
it's
States as well. I met a teacher again in Honduras who had never met a black person until he was 21 years old. One time I was in rural Mississippi and a little kid walked up to me and was like, "Hey, Dad, this is a real live black man." He had never seen a black person before. So, I mean, that can even happen when we're back home, depending on the population that you're dealing with. So, I can only imagine internationally. Like, yes, we do have feelings, we have dreams, aspirations, family, and all these other things. That's really dope. So, I guess it's a question that I've asked people living abroad. How is dating, if that's a thing for you in the UAE or in Shanghai, or are you doing a long distance thing with someone back home? You don't have to tell me
let
this.
me tell you.
Huh?
Dating in the UAE. First of all, I tell people that clearly I wasn't dating when I was in America. I think I probably just met people and I liked them and they just became my boyfriend. That's what I mean, clearly,
And
because
we go together.
this thing in the UAE, man, I could have had a show. I mean, the growth in me would say I learned a lot about myself, but I think also kind of similar to what I just mentioned. I also learned like perception. Like I felt like I was overly sexualized. I felt so super self-conscious,
Mm,
especially if I went on a date with someone that was not black, which I did. I and it's like I felt like I was thinking about too many things. Like I was thinking about what I was wearing on the date, because like if I'm showing something, then someone thinks that like I'm trying to like give it up tomorrow, or like I just felt like I was carrying this weight of like how I was perceived, because based on the conversations or things that people would allude to, always felt very sexual, like
mm,
right away,
mm,
you know. So that made me so super self-conscious, like in a way that I'm like, do women always thinking about all these things? And then I realized it was just kind of part of it was just being overseas. Like I feel like some guys, especially if they're not black and they're getting an opportunity to go out with a black woman, it might be just a fetish, or just to like fulfill some like fantasy,
right.
or you know what I mean? And because generally speaking, like my hair is shaved off, but right now I'm growing it. And I think also the fact that I had a shaved hair, it kind of gave me that. I don't even like to use the word exotic, but just kind of gave like a look that people might make assumptions about me. So here I'm in the Middle East where you're not supposed to shave your hair off because that's haram. And then, so I think I just had too many things going on that people had like certain assumptions, I think, about me. And I think just coupled with being Black. So it was definitely a journey of like, oh no, no, no. Like I feel like blocking people. I mean, I had guys like trying to harass me. Um, yeah, like I had like two guys harass me. I had one guy who like had like a whole family and a woman that was pregnant.
He's trying to make you his
Yes.
second wife or
I mean,
something?
as I said, I could have had a show. I could have had a show
Okay.
on my experiences. And I think partly it was because I was Black. I think it was partly because I was Black, because my hair was shaved. I think that there was this kind of assumption about like who I was. And it didn't stop me from dating, but I just became very cautious and aware, and sometimes made me defensive. I think like thinking about like, I mean, it's one thing to think someone's attractive, but when you feel like someone has like this idea of who you are without really getting to know you, it's kind of a turn off, and then also, just to be honest, I mean, I think as expats, I feel like most men are not looking to settle down when they're an expat. I feel like most men, in my experience, are just trying to have a really good time, you know?
Yeah,
And I
I would
think that
argue that's
women,
I would just argue that's men in general, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
I think, yeah, but it's like, I mean, I firmly used to tell people, like, listen, I want to be an expat, but I still want all the things that I would have, like, if I was back home. Like, it's possible.
Mhm.
So I feel, I mean, because I've known friends that got married overseas, so I was kind of like hopeful, but actually I did meet somebody in China, surprisingly.
Okay. Dope.
So we don't know.
We don't know.
Um,
Want to see.
he's not Chinese, guys. If you guys are curious, everybody keeps asking, is he Chinese? No, he's not.
Okay.
But
I won't have
yeah,
too many details on no dude, but if something happens more, you're gonna have to check back in with us and let us know, if a ring comes out of it, a baby or whatever.
sure. I was definitely let I'll let the streets know.
And so
That's
I won't get too much more into your business. I guess my question for you would be like, what are some things, tips that you would give people that are looking to make this leap, to go abroad, to teach abroad, to live in places like the Middle East, China? What are like, I don't know, the top two things that you would want to tell people?
I would definitely think about what your goal is. Like, um, just know why you're going. As I said, when I went to the UAE, it was about money. I knew I had debt. I knew it was tax free. I knew that that was a place to go. And I knew it would be easy to make a transition. So I think you should get real honest about where you're going, and like also know what your non-negotiables are.
Mm,
Like know what you don't want to do, because I don't think, it's already a very hard process to like leave everything that you know to start a whole new life, and you don't want to create too many barriers with yourself, because you'll probably just go back home right away, or you might become severely depressed or what have you. Because in general, something that I didn't mention, like, it's a challenge. Even though I mentioned the Facebook groups and all of that, it is a challenge creating friendships as an adult, especially as an expat too. I mean, you have these cool social groups that you might meet, but like having like a core friend, like when you're feeling down and all that, that takes time to build. So you really want to make sure you have that grounding for yourself, because the last thing you want is to go somewhere where you didn't want to go, that you don't have support. You're going to drive yourself mad. I would definitely say those two things are important. And I would all thirdly, I would say last thing is, if you have a strong support network at home, include them on your journey as much as you can, so that it doesn't feel like a disconnect. Like you don't want to, like Jenny, for example, like I speak to her in the same frequency as like friends here, because I hold her dear to my heart. So I don't try to be like the person that you just see in the summer. And now I'm trying to give you a recap from September. It just, you people will be disconnected to you. I think that including people on the process, because often people do see expat life as everything all good, and they probably think you're living your best life and like you don't have problems, you don't have any issues. And then when you go through those issues, you won't have the support, because everyone perceived it as going on thousands of trips, your salary and all of that. So I think it's really important to choose the people that are closest to you back home and I mean, it might be uncomfortable with the time zone and all of that, but I think it's worth it in the grand scheme, because those are the people that know you best, and you're going to need that support for sure.
No, definitely. Well, thank you for that advice. Thank you for those tips. So, how can people get in contact with you if they have questions, want to follow up, want to see what you're doing on a day to day? What's your, IG, Facebook?
Sure, my IG is the Soulful Expat. I have a passion for spirituality, personal development, mindset. I think you could surely attract and have anything you desire, like debt freedom and the man of your dreams and all the things. The Soulful Expat, and then my Facebook is Nicole Annmarie.